Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is DK Bhattacharya. We will be discussing about the tools and typology today. But before that, we must know why we are studying tools and typology as a part of anthropology of all things. Anthropology studies man in time and space. And when you say man in time means past men, and past men goes up to as far as 2.2 million years past. Now the culture of man, you study a present day culture by video cassettes, by observation and so on. How do you study the culture of the past men? They are all dead and gone. Because culture is an intangible reality. You can't photograph culture, you can't hold culture. So culture of the past is identified and studied through the products of culture. And what is a product of culture? It is nothing but what we call in anthropology as antiquity. Antiquity is a dumb witness of behavior. Behavior is not recorded, but the witness is there, and the witness is the antiquity. Now we have to make a sense of this antiquity, this witness. So how do I name the witness? I name it as a chair or a table because it is chair and table is there today. But when it's past cultural behavior, I can't give it a name right on the basis of what is the function of it, because we don't know what the function of it. Suppose you have a table, you have a chair. You can call it by the same name, and a table, the moment somebody says it's a table, you know the structure of it and you know the function of it. So you can easily call these terms as cognitive types. Cognitive types refer to objects, their descriptions, and their functions. So you have a Rasgulla as a cognitive type. But we can't have cognitive types for the past behavior, because if we have a cognitive type for the past behavior, we would be making an illicit generalization of the functions of the past people. You can say prehistoric computer. It's nonsense, because you don't know the function of the prehistoric people. So we have to create our own names. Now this is a very big shift in understanding culture. Product of culture is antiquity, but the antiquity cannot be named on the basis of the way we name things today. So we have to name it on the basis of our analysis. So we call it an analytical types. What is an analytical type? An analytical type is a type where you talk of only structure. We do not attribute a function to it. An analytical type is identified on the basis of morphology and technology. In other words, we have to know what is the technique by which it was manufactured. Now that's another big hurdle. We don't know how it was manufactured unless we imitate the product by in the lab and produce a similar effect of the past culture. So technique and morphology together forms a term which is called typology. There is a problem here. The problem is culture is basically, if you go by Tyler's definition, culture is basically all behaviors and belief. Belief and behavior together makes culture. Now please tell me, how do you know the belief and behavior of the antiquities? You can ask the antiquities, what was the belief that produced you, and they can't reply it. So basically, you are in a tricky position of making a science out of the product of behavior and not talking of behavior per se. And since you're not talking of behavior, then people will say, what is this? You are analyzing behavior without talking of behavior. So we say, no, we'll do the behavior part, but it will be called interpretation. So analysis is the brass track, the real hardcore science where you talk of morphology and technology. But we have a right to give an interpretation. So there is an interpretational level of saying, well, this must have been used for cutting flesh. This was a tool that must be used for making a hole. So you can try to give a possibilistic function, but not a deterministic function. So it is to be very clearly understood that in archaeology, all the functions that we talk about are possibilistic and not deterministic. You can't take a piece of antiquity and say this was used for this function, because the function 2000 years ago or 4000 years ago may not have been the same as the functions we know today. Now, this is a very fine division of the methods of interpretation and methods of objective analysis. So when you try to do the objective analysis of tools and types, remember that we are essentially trying to talk about culture. Now, I know a culturologist who is studying the dancing pattern of the Santals will laugh at me. But the point remains that Santals are alive, I can take a video photograph of it. But I cannot take the video photograph of the Harappans. I didn't know how they used to dance. So, though essentially the target of both an anthropologist and archaeologist is the same, studying culture, but archaeologist has to create his own methodology, his own cartography of understanding culture from the product of culture. And a product of culture does not speak about function. Product of culture cannot be given a name of a function. Then you have to say, I will interpret the function, but I will determine the method of analysis on the basis of types and techniques. So you give names of types, like you have types today, a hammer, a chisel, you have all kinds of names. We can't give those names to our prehistoric types. Because the moment you say it is a hammer, you are assuming that they had a function of a goldsmith or a function of an ironsmith, where a hammer was used for a particular function. So we will not talk about function unless it is at an interpretative level. In an analytical level, we'll talk of structure. That is a very simple example. A cycle, a motorcycle, a car, a truck, all has the same function, propagation of distance. But do they have the same structure? No. So what I'm trying to say is function cannot be the basis of analysis. Function is interpretative. Basis of analysis has to be hardcore type technique. So tool types and techniques of this module becomes a very important methodological tool of trying to understand past culture. I have no other alternative. I can't ask the bricks of Harappa what kind of language they used to speak, were they Aryans or Dravidians. So you can see the inbuilt problem of trying to work of culture of the past is that we cannot talk of function at all as a method of studying. We can talk of function as interpretation. Having said as much, we come to the tools and types. The tools and types that we are going to have are all analytical types. We are not going to use cognitive types. A cognitive type will have a huge load of function. Hammer, the moment the word hammer comes, it's a type. The hammer has a particular shape and it will have a particular function, a chisel, a borer. But we can't use these names, so we have to create our own names, and they are called analytical types. And when you try to create own names, you try to develop a classificatory order of techniques of manufacture. How do I know something which was made in a particular technique? There is no other way but to try and do it on my own in my lab. So what we do is that we try to break a stone with another stone. Remember, it's a Stone Age, so they don't have a metal hammer. So they have a stone hammer. So we try to break a stone with another stone, see the effect on it under ultraviolet rays or under single wavelength of light, and compare it with a prehistoric stone that must have been broken the same way. So then we interpret, look, this must be broken in the same way. Suppose we have seen the prehistoric tool which compares with my method from a site called Clacton-on-Sea. We call it Clactonian technique. Do I make myself clear? The point I repeat is that I try a technique myself, and that result of the technique I compare with the prehistoric antiquity. And if the prehistoric antiquity has been collected from a site called Clacton-on-Sea in southeast England, then I say, oh, this is Clactonian technique. So the technique I have done, I give a name, and the name is entirely structural, it has nothing to do with function. So a structural name like Clactonian technique is given, Levallois technique is given, stone hammer technique is given, cylinder hammer technique is given, pressure flaking technique. So you have a huge number of techniques. Remember, my type, what was the type? Antiquity. My antiquity is going to be named on the basis of techno and morpho. So technique has to be named. I didn't have names of techniques. So I named techniques on the basis of these kind of structures. Now, there are attributes to identify techniques. It can't be imaginary. So you create an attribute. So if you try to take a stone and hit it with another stone, a flake will come out. The piece that comes out is a flake. The piece that is still in your hand is a core. So you give two names, core and flake. Then in the flake, there will be the part that was attached before it was detached, will be called scar of detachment. And that scar of detachment, right where the hammer had hit it before it's detached, there will be elevated part which is called positive bulb of percussion. These are methods, are structures which are very similar to what has been experimented in the lab and the physics lab also. So you have a positive bulb of percussion as a deterministic and identifying attribute of a flake. If a piece of stone has a positive bulb of percussion, it has to be called a flake. If a piece of stone has a negative bulb of percussion, which is the corresponding part in the core, you call it a core. So you have two words, core and flakes, identified for the first time to decide on terminology of the past antiquities, the tools. And then you go on to say how this flake was detached. Core and flake. How the flake was detached. Say, this flake was detached by a single blow. Okay, let us call it by a name, stone hammer technique. Sir, this flake was detached by a chiseling technique, almost like what a goldsmith will do for us. And I call it, oh, this is a pressure flaking technique. So I give a name to the techniques, Clactonian, Lavoisian, pressure flicking, and cylinder hammer, and blah, blahs and blah, blah. So you have techniques and techniques and techniques. I'm for the first time introducing the word, the techniques. You say, why techniques? When I was trying to understand the dancing culture of Santals, I didn't have to know about the techniques. But there I could see the Santals dancing. The past cultures, I can't see the culture per se. I'm seeing the product of the culture. And the product of the culture has to be sanitized from functional interpretation. So I try to give structural interpretation. For the first time, I give terms to the objects, terms to the techniques. So I create terms which are of various experimented words, and we will have it in the form of flake and a core, and the positive bulb of percussion, the negative bulb of percussion, and so on and so forth. Having said as much, don't forget, I have to still talk about type. I've not talked about type. Type is a cluster. Type is a conglomerate, which has two words. One is structure, the other is technique, technomorpho. Now, how do I talk of structure? So I'll have to decide on structure also. Structure refers to the morphology. It can be heavy, it can be bulky, it can be thin, it can be a very slicey piece of object, it can be elongated, it can be round, it can be whatever. So I try to even standardize these morphologies. And after standardizing the morphologies and standardizing the terms for the techniques by which these morphologies have been attempted, I create a conglomerate term called typotechnology. So for instance, let us say a chopper. What is a chopper? I give it a name chopper, though unfortunately, because of historical reasons, the term still refers to function, which is a taboo for me. Analysis cannot be based on functional terms. Interpretation can. But on the analysis basis, you can't use the word chopper, hammer, and so on and so forth. So unfortunately, that term is continuing for historical reasons. Anyway, now let us look at the chopper. And I have to have two attributes, the morphology and technology. So I talk about the morphology first. A chopper is a massive tool. Massive refers to mass. Exception of 2-3 sites, most of the choppers all over the world are never less than half a kilo in weight. They're massive pebbles. Morphology. Massive pebbles, morphology. They have a transverse working border, morphology. They have a couple of terminal flakes taken out of the transverse border, morphology. Technique. Technique, we say, if these morphologies are present and you can prove that each one of the point of impact is extremely concave negative bulb of percussion, they refer to a technique called block-on-block technique. So here is a combination. Chopper is a type with a massive core, which has a transverse working border, and it has a technique of manufacture of block-on-block technique. So I create a conglomerate term, chopper. I can go to the extent of saying, sir, this is a chopper culture. This is a hand axe culture. Now, look, our terminology of describing a culture is so far away from the way a Santhal dance will be described by a culturologist, because that is a contemporary culture. I'm talking of the past culture. There is a different issue that somebody from culturologist can say, what the hell are you doing? Why are you studying a culture of the past and giving it a name which makes no sense? Chopper culture, hand axe culture, as it still does make sense. It makes a sense from no sense. Otherwise, no possibility of reaching the past behavior. And the past behavior we are identifying is from statements like this. Oldest human tool ever manufactured is a chopper. It makes a sense. It slowly goes to develop what is known as a hand axe. Now again, unfortunately, the word axe refers to function. Please don't pay any attention to the functional term. It is a structural term, a core in which both the surfaces are flaked. Both the surfaces are flaked. Now it's morphology. One end is pointed and the other end is broad. One end is thinner, the other end is thicker. Such a specimen will be called hand axe, QED. But then you have to mix it with technique. It can be prepared by block on block technique. It can be prepared by simple stone hammer technique. It can be prepared by cylinder hammer technique. So you take three types of techniques and one type of morphology, combine them together, the type is called hand axe. Now you make a statement. One of the earliest human culture is a chopper culture. The next culture within 500,000 years become hand axes. You made a statement of progressive development of culture through time. So a cultural anthropologist may not try to do a diachronic analysis of what led to what, but an archaeologist has to constantly talk to the temporal paradigm, that he has to talk of the past and how much past, and how things have been changing. Now this is the way we are trying to calibrate cultural progression. Shall we say civilizational growth? Shall we say civilizational progression? We can talk about these progressive change of human technique and hence the human type, and we make a sense about the past culture. Therefore, tool types and tool techniques are the cardinal methodological apparatus to begin understanding those primeval old times human activity where culture has its beginning called zero. Culture begins from the time man enters the genus Homo. Man enters the genus Homo 2.4 or 2.5 million years ago. So it's 2.45 million years ago, he first becomes an animal who is called tool-making man. Now the tool making, because previous to that, there was no animal who was making a tool. So the question is, who was the first who made a tool? And what was the tool? So you see, you do make a sense, obviously not comparable to what kind of sense a living culturologist can make, but we are trying to act an arm of argument to the basic subject called anthropology. Anthropology is trying to understand culture through time and space. So time component has to be entirely dealt by archaeologists, and they have to develop their own methodology. Tool types and tool techniques are two cardinal paradigms of approaching behavior. I'll give one more example. Suppose you take 1 kilo of stone. How many flakes can you take out from it? You can take out about 20 flakes, large big pieces of flake. So 20 flakes, each flake having 1 inch, 1 inch, 2 inch sharp borders. 20 flakes will have 40 inch sharp border. And if you take a core which is 1 kilo and you make it having some sharp border along, then you can make 6 inches, 6 inches, 12 inches sharp border. No. If you are making a core tool, you are making a 12-inch sharp border. If you reduce that core into flakes, you are making 2 into 20, 40 inches of sharp border. So can I make a statement that flake tools are more evolved than core tools? The cultural efficiency of a man who has been making flake tool is more evolved than those who made core tools. So we are making a kind of statement about progression of culture. Then you go on to talk about the kind of flake one has made. A Clactonian flake is a very essentially good type of massive flake. Before I try to talk about the types of tools, it is very important to let you know that tool types cannot be studied in isolation with human biology. One of the most important things that we forget while trying to do archaeology is that for the prehistoric men from about 2.2 million years to almost as much as 200,000 years, the way the hand used to grip the tool used to be called power grip. Power grip is where your palm acts as the power and the finger acts merely as a clip. Now, it is believed that these massive tools, choppers, and massive flakes called Clactonian flakes may have been used when power grip was the possible anatomical evolutionary stage of the man of that time. By the time it comes to a higher species or higher level of development, it reduces the method of technique of holding a tool to what is called precision grip. A precision grip is the way a baby an adult holds a spoon. Power grip is the way a baby holds a spoon. A precision grip, the palm doesn't play any role. The fingers plays the role. So you see, both Clactonian flakes and massive chopper chopping tools refer to that part of human evolution where at least 27 more movements, ability to move the finger and the palm was not there. That's why he went for power grip and massive tools. It was during the time of, let us say, 200,000 to 300,000 years back that you for the first time see a new technique called level-over technique. Now, what is level-over technique? It's a technique where from a core, you decide the shape of the flake that will be decided or detached before it is detached. So, a flake is conceived before it is born. And this kind of flake, which is medium size, are perfectly suited to what is known as precision grip. Precision grip means holding the way an adult holds the spoon. The power part doesn't come into being. So level-over technique shows a tremendous change human biocultural evolution, where you see the development of a new ability of holding tools. So you create smaller flake tools like points, scrapers, and so on and so forth. And then you have, when you make a level-over tool or a level-over flake, now there's a method of detachment. I repeat, it's a core is taken, a flake is first conceived by detaching, and then a blow is given and a flake is detached. So the flake has been conceived before it was detached. That's a level-over technique. They're always medium shaped, never more than 6 centimeters in length. So you know we have entered the precision grip area. Now here comes a stage where you don't try to destroy the size of the flake, and you don't want to destroy the tool which you are manufacturing, because if you give a big blow, it will be becoming dust, powdered, and it will develop crack. So you want to control the blow, and you develop what is known as cylinder hammer technique. Now, cylinder hammer technique is a technique which is best represented or best given an example by looking at a cucumber and a knife. The way you cut with the knife, the cucumber, a slice comes out. And the slice that comes out in this technique will be always uniform in thickness. So here you have a control of the manner or matter of material that can be detached. Give a big stone blow, a lot of matter will be detached. Give a cylinder hammer blow, a chiseling effect will happen. So when you have gone for smaller flakes, that is level-over technique, you decide, no, stone hammer technique will not do, because I try to give a stone hammer blow, it breaks into two. After all, these are thin pieces, thin flakes. So you try to use cylinder hammer technique. Please remember, morphology and technology goes hand in hand. Cylinder hammer comes and level-over flake becomes a type. Level-over flake of detachment becomes a type. And this level-over flake detachment slowly gives rise to another variety of flake, which is no longer called flake, which is called a blade. And what is a blade? A blade is a flake in which the length is more than or equal to twice its breadth. So every blade is a flake essentially, but every flake is not a blade. So you have blades which are, the first time one blow, you're getting a piece which has two sharp borders. Now try to compare with the core tool type, the chopper type, where so many blows used to be given to get a small sharp borders. Here you give one piece, the piece comes out with too much sharp borders. So blade making technique, which is after level-over technique, you have punching technique, you have fluting technique, you have so many techniques of taking out blades. So you see a regular progression: core tools, flake tools, level-over flakes, blade tools, and then the fluting technique. You can make a progression of techniques and types, and this is our civilizational history. So please, the roadmap or the cartography of understanding or calibrating or analyzing human culture of the past, past, is only analyzing the product of behavior, product of culture. Then you try to look at the varieties of types. You go to the initial phase of choppers, there will be 2 or 3 types. You go to the blades, there will be 25 types. So as you progress in time, you find the variety of types increase. I always give the example that when you are a prehistoric tribe, or let us say you are an old evolutionary scale, you are in the lower scale, you have only one hunger. And when you come to this stage that you are in, you have several forms of hunger, from pizza down to achar, down to sweets. So the requirement, which is biological function of getting 80 mg of sugar in the body, is now trying to getting several taste paradigms. In the same way, you go to a very small village, the cycle repairer man will have 2 or 3 tools. You go to Garware and Engineering Institute, you will have hundreds of tools. 116 grade, 128 grade, so many grades. So you can make a kind of a gradation of civilizational transformation on the basis of not only types, not only techniques, but on the varieties and multiplicity of types. I repeat again, chopper and chopping tools will be 2 types. Hand axe, cleaver can be of several types. And then you go to flake, my God, you can have 30, 40 types. You go to blade, you can go to have 20, 60 types. So you have constantly possibility of grading human activity metamorphosis. Last line I would say, there is an indication around say 120,000 years ago or 140,000 years ago, the large number of borers start coming in. Here I again like to recall biocultural evolution. You know, in biocultural evolution, man started becoming daytime hunter for the first time after around 200,000 years. And when you become daytime hunter, evolution saw to it that your body hair is lost and instead large amount of sweat pores are created. So if your sweat pores are created, then it keeps the skin is kept cool with the sweat pores. Now what happens is that it's good enough, it keeps you cool, but when in the night or in the winter, you now don't have the fur, so you feel cold. And you have to have some wrapper to wrap you up, and naturally that must have been leather. And now if this is a biological reality, it is reflected in cultural tool types. You find from around 120,000 years, large number of borers are found. What are they doing with these borers? You know that these indicate the work with leather. They have been taking the skins out of the animal and making holes to wrap them up, or maybe even making the cover of a hut for dwelling. So you have a parallel development you can see from biological development and cultural development. We may not be able to make an analytical statement the way a culturologist does, but we certainly can make a statement about civilizational progression. We certainly can make a statement about the variegated kind of adaptational strategies that a higher culture has from the monocultural adaptation of the lower cultures. Now we can make such statements, but we certainly can't make any statement about non-material culture. Now that's a big blank. We do not know how they danced. We do not know their agonies and ecstasies. We do not know what were their beliefs, and this is called non-material culture. So prehistoric archaeology through tool types and techniques can calibrate material culture, material existence, but certainly cannot go into non-material culture. Though non-material culture will have no leftover of antiquities except during the time man started painting the caves. When the cave painting came, which is only about 20,000 or 30,000 years back, these cave paintings are a reflection of human anxiety, human agony, human fear, human complexity, which otherwise tools don't reflect in. So this is a component which starts coming very late in time. Tool types and techniques certainly does not enable us to reconstruct the non-material component of culture, but by this we do not, by no sense, deny the existence of non-material culture. Non-material culture did exist. In fact, it does. The material component is the only thing that is left over for us to analyze, but non-material culture we cannot analyze for the large chunk of human cultural history. It is only from 30,000 years on, or 35 to 40,000 years on, that we get some art objects which are definitely not for survival, which are not definitely to kill an animal, which shows human anxiety, and you know, this human anxiety and the human fear, agonies, ecstasies, jealousies, these are all emotions which started coming up from 200,000 when large number of hormones were introduced in human evolution. Hormones started getting introduced after rut was withdrawn. Man is the only animal who does not have a rut. So rut was withdrawn, but a huge amount of hormones were introduced. So we are a trapped hormone dominated species. And these hormone dominations start showing up in art and execution of art, varieties of art, armlets, decorations of various kinds of bone armlets. In Russia, there's a site called Maznin where you find armlets made out of elephant bones. So you have these evidences coming from around this time, but tools and types are essentially, large majority, referring to the older periods of time and our methods of calibrating, analyzing, and describing the material component of culture and not non-material component. So the material component of culture, our terms we use: chopper chopping culture, hand axe cleaver culture, level of flake culture, blade culture. So terms are our terms. Why? Because we promised that we'll have analytical terms and not cognitive terms. Cognitive terms would be different. The hunting gathering culture, the fishing culture, and these kind of terms are used by some American archaeologists primarily because American archaeology is very young. It's post-Columbus. Columbus goes there and identified the American Indians, and they are very young cultures, so they can talk in terms of pastoral culture, fishing culture, and so on. But old world, America is not old world. Old world culture, Africa and Asia and Europe, we have a large chunk of cultural period where non-material culture cannot or should not be used as analytical methodology. Interpretation we do use. The interpretation, everybody has a right to interpret, and you can have as many interpretations as number of scholars. But you cannot have as many methods of analysis as number of scholars. Methods of analysis is rigorous on methodology of morphology and typology. So you have to study typology and techniques. A long method or rigorous training has to be given, and this to a culturologist might look a little ridiculous, but we have no other alternative. Our only alternative is to study these techniques and standardize it, because the same term has to be used for Australia or Africa or Eurasia. Anywhere, the same terms have to be used to describe the tools that they made and why did they make it. Some tools have been made which it is believed they used for hunting, but then it is interpretation. Well, there is nothing written in the tool to show it is for hunting. Many times we say, for all you know, this was used for social investment. What is a social investment? A social investment is, I want to present you something so that you can give me something. And this is gift giving, and this social investment is a common paradigm in social anthropology. And we find that there are some tools which are beautifully made, like a level of flake in 17 or 18,000 in Western Europe. Beautifully made, but they are absolutely useless as a utilitarian tool. They will crack because it's a very thin tool. And then you say, maybe are these tools are methods of social investment? Now, are you not saying something which no other person can say from the tools themselves? We are saying something which is non-material. Oh, see, these people have the habit of creating social investment. There are two methods of social investment known as living population: giving feast and giving presents. I can't prove it for the past, but when I find these non-utilitarian, beautifully made tools, I start suspecting they couldn't be utilitarian anyway. So why were they made with so much of precious time wasted on it? Could it be that they were used for social investment? I don't know, but that is my interpretation. So you can see from around 200,000 years, our interpretational paradigms become a little more spread in possibilistic terms. But you go beyond 200,000, that is from 2.2 million years to 200,000, you certainly cannot talk of all those ramified behavioral axioms. You talk of only adaptation to hunger. How did he procure his food? How did he protected himself? So you say he protected himself with chopper and chopping tool, or hunted animals with chopper and chopping tools, and so on. So you come back to the same issue of tool types. You can't avoid it. Tool types and tool techniques. Now mind you, type is a combination of both morphology and techniques. So you have to have this method of studying technique and standardized techniques as the only roadmap to understanding human culture of the past. You have no other alternative.